focusing on energy prices is the thing. Can we bring down taxes overall across the economy? Well, for that, you need a growing economy. You have to generate the wealth. So here, perhaps I do differ a bit.
This morning's stories. It's Tuesday, so that means it's going to be with former Conservative Party leader, Foreign Secretary and Times columnist William Hague, and Kezia Dugdale, also a Times columnist, as well as the director of the John Smith Centre at Glasgow University and former Scottish Labour leader. I'm exhausted. What a long sentence. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
You can join the conversation by texting 87222, starting your message with the word Times, tweeting at Times Radio, or emailing studio@times.radio. And you can give us your name and your long title as well, if you so wish. We're going to start with the cost of living then, first of all. Ian Duncan Smith earlier, he was on the programme just after 8 o'clock. We asked him what he thought the government should be doing about the cost of living crisis. And he sought to draw a line between fiscal policy and monetary policy. He says that really it's all about taxes. William, he said, I'm sure you heard, lower taxes and injection of money into universal credit. Is that the right approach, do you think?
Well, it could be, couldn't it? I think everybody and we've talked about this before, that with the extent of the rise coming in energy prices, there does need to be some more help given to people on low incomes. Then you can debate, do you do that through something like universal credit? Do you do that through other aspects of the benefit system, council tax rebates for people in lower council tax bands that the government's already used? These are the sorts of things that the Chancellor has to weigh up ahead of a budget or whenever else he makes announcements on these things. But definitely, I think there does need to be a help given directly to people. We have to be realistic, though. We can't just print the money to do that. Otherwise, we have even higher inflation. So somehow the money would have to be found for that. And I think the case has grown for a windfall tax, since there has been a genuine windfall for the oil companies. But this is the trade-off that has to be made.
You're right. I mean, there's so many different ideas floating around, William, and the council tax rebate, which was supposed to help offset people's energy bills. Apparently, that's run into some trouble. There's a charity, National Energy Action, who said that there are many people who are still waiting for that rebate. These are people who don't pay their council tax by direct debit, and they're facing a long wait for these payouts. So this isn't necessarily something that's going straight into people's pockets straight away, and that's presumably why the government has to look at this in its totality. What do you think is the most important thing at this point? Is it the fact, the opinion that Ian Duncan Smith holds that taxes are too high and that they need to be brought down as a whole, or is it focusing on universal credit?
Well, I think it is focusing on the energy prices. As I said, there are different ways of doing that, including through universal credit. Ian Duncan Smith invented universal credit, so he's particularly attached to using that method. Focusing on energy prices is the thing. Can we bring down taxes overall across the economy? Well, for that, you need a growing economy. You have to generate the wealth. So here, perhaps I do differ a bit from him, and that I don't think we can let budget deficits run away with themselves. I think we've got to be disciplined financially, and if we're going to give away more money, we need to raise more money. So there perhaps I have a difference of emphasis from him.
Kezia, some people, commentators, the Lib Dems, we had them on earlier, the deputy leader was saying that the government have been are not doing anything. They need to be doing something in the short term. Now, this is not necessarily an easy problem to grasp. Do you think that the government should have done something already? And what might that be? Or do you think actually they do need to kind of take stock and wait until things have settled a little bit, whether that's a month or 2 months, and then take action?
I think there are things they could have done which would make the current situation less severe than it is. And the most obvious one would have been to ensure that benefits and universal credit kept in line with inflation, because the reality that people who rely on that state support have seen the real value of their income go down because it hasn't kept up with rising prices. So I think the job of the government is to try and do two things. One is to attempt to control cost, and the other is to increase family incomes. Now, Conservatives will argue the way to do that is to lower the tax base, the pressure of taxes, and you'll find people are on the centre and centre left argue that perhaps what we need to do is to look at more progressive feeder taxes and actually to increase the support that people get from the state. The reality, all of this needs to be taken more seriously and acted upon now, rather than waiting for what I think is going to happen, which is, a big boon come October, where the Chancellor wakes up with a long, cold, hard winter ahead and realises that he won't survive that winter in terms of his party's popularity without taking some serious interventions.
So where would you, out of all the ideas that we've discussed so far, then, which ones would you go for? Lower taxes across the board, more money into universal credit, a windfall tax? Which of those do you think need to be approached or attacked in the short term?
So I think, one, increase universal credit in line with inflation so that it keeps its value. Two, you need to increase the national minimum wage and the living wage. I don't accept that increasing those would increase inflationary pressure. And three, we need to look at more progressive taxes. So those who earn more money should pay more through the tax system, which can be redistributed back around into the benefit system.
And the windfall tax?
Well, I'm not against the windfall tax. I think it's certainly right now, when the big oil and gas companies are making the profits that they are, a one-off windfall tax would be beneficial and bring extra money into the exchequer. But you can't base it on being consolidated. It might just be that 1 year. It's not going to solve the cost of living crisis, which is going to be with us for a few years. So yes, do it, but don't present it as the solution to everything.
Yeah, which I think you agree with Ian Duncan Smith in that regard. He was a bit lukewarm on it. You think maybe you do it, but maybe you don't, but it's not going to solve any structural difficulties. Let's move on to obesity. The government's strategy to tackle obesity has seen some changes and challenges in recent weeks. William, you, of course, are an achingly svelte man yourself. You wrote a column on this. They're U-turning, aren't they? Because Boris Johnson had a Damascene conversion to to problems of fatness when he was fat and had COVID. And he started saying, well, maybe, thinking about interventions that he previously wouldn't have done. One of which was to say we shouldn't have buy one, get one free meal deals. He's now changed his mind on that. Are you worried about that?
Yes, as you can gather from my column this morning, I'm more than worried about it. I think it's a disgrace to change tack on this now. The government's developed an anti-obesity strategy, and now it's already losing heart on it and being driven off it. This is an absolutely central problem in our society. And in particular in the UK, where we've got more obesity than any other country in Europe. And there we were talking about lower taxes a moment ago. Well, if there's to be any hope at all of lower taxes in the future, we have to have a healthier population. We're already spending £18 billion a year on diet-related diseases. And people aren't opting into this, but it's not freedom of choice. They're not sitting and saying, oh, I think it would be good to be obese. They are the victims of a junk food cycle, a sort of chemically induced addiction to this, and companies are caught in it themselves. So, yes, I'm very critical of this government U-turn, and I think they need to be strengthening, not weakening, their anti-obesity strategy.
When you say these things to your Conservative friends, William, do any of them wag their fingers at you and say, where have you become this nanny state man, William Hague? If people have to make their own choices in life, they have to decide what they can eat and what they can't eat. It is not a matter for the government to intervene in this area because it's anti-conservative, essentially, to do so.
Well, this is my argument, that it's the absolute opposite of that, that the people are not free. They're not using their free will if they're being hooked on sugar and salt and saturated fats. And real freedom is having the good health to pursue the career of your choice, and being strong enough to protect your loved ones, and being fit enough to take part in sports and games. And how can we possibly have one child in 5 at the age of 11 obese? What choice did they make to that? That's not freedom at all. So I take a different view of conservatism. Some of them would wag their fingers at me, but I can tell you I'm getting quite a few text messages from others saying you're absolutely right this morning inside the Conservative Party. So I hope I'm redressing the debate from all these people obsessed with the nanny state and who are presiding over the country health-wise, going in absolutely the wrong direction.
Just before I ask Kezia about this, do you think that's why he's doing this, though? There's been a bit of red meat being thrown in all sorts of areas, in the culture war, in the endless working from home debate. Is this another example of this is quite an easy thing to throw to the anti-nanny staters in the party?
Yes, absolutely. There is that. And again, that is the wrong thing. That's not leadership. That is weakness. As well as it's this intellectually shallow argument that because of the cost of living crisis, where we have to stop these these promotions, these buy one, get one free, we have to still allow those. The whole point of those is to get people to spend more on food. That's why companies have them. So it is part of that red meat, and it is a mistake. And I am in a way making the point that while that may please some conservatives, it upsets others, and the rest of us are going to fight back.
Kezia, you're not a conservative. Do you disagree with William on this?
I think he's absolutely spot on. I think he's made the most compelling case from the right as to why these state interventions are required. He couldn't be more correct about the pressures that the NHS is going to face in years to come. And if we can reduce the demand on the NHS, that's the best saving we could possibly make, not just to the NHS, but to people's livelihoods and health and general well-being. If there's one thing I think that's maybe missing from William's article, if I could be so critical,
Please go ahead.
Is to suggest that we don't talk enough about how to make good quality food cheaper. So the reason lots of people rely on high sugar, high fat food is because it's cheap and because it's accessible to them locally. It's much harder for people who have a lot of time pressure in their lives, perhaps because they work several jobs or because they live in deprived communities that don't have access to decent food. They don't have the choice that William and I would like them to have. And if you look at other countries across Europe, you have a maximum price for a basic baguette made from decent ingredients in France. Much of the cheapest bread that we have in this country is full of air and sugar and has zero nutritional value. There are other countries across Europe where there's a maximum price for a basic coffee or a basic meal out, particularly in France, for example. We don't have that culture in the United Kingdom. I'd be so interested to see some of that grow and develop so that everybody had access to decent quality food.
I think we can all agree on that. We're going to move on now and talk about Vladimir Putin. It's been reported that he's been making the decisions that would normally be taken by a colonel or brigadier. And I suppose the question really is, what does that say about what on earth is going on? Is this a long-term change in the Russian military's power structure, or is this just to do with the failures of the Russian invasion of Ukraine? William Hague, what do you think is going on? Why is Vladimir Putin making these kind of decisions?
Well, I think he will have lost faith by now in his generals. I mean, any rational person actually by now would have lost faith in his generals, because they will have been saying, oh, yeah, we can take the whole of Ukraine. And oh, yes, we can take the Donbass. And just give us a bit of time and we'll do it. And of course, they're failing in all their main objectives. So he will be getting frustrated and saying, right, you advance that battalion there. Now, this is not the answer, of course. He will make even bigger mistake. There's no way, even if he was a genius, that he would be able to run a war from a distance. His problem is systemic. His problem is that his armed forces aren't able to fight in an integrated way, that they don't have a culture of making decisions on the ground according to the situation at low levels. And so he will sit in Moscow and get more and more frustrated, saying, tell that unit to advance when it doesn't really exist anymore. So I think this is what is going on, and it's part of a extraordinary failure of the Russian armed forces that look like they're within a couple of weeks of reaching what they call their point of culmination, of having got as far as they can get. And then we have the next stage of this crisis.
Let's talk about this other stories on the front of the Times today. The Blackpool footballer Jake Daniels coming out as the only openly gay male professional footballer in Britain at the age of just 17. Kezia, at one level, this is great news and everyone feels very happy for him and good luck to him. Is it surprising that it's taken so long? I mean, how happy should we be that it's a 17-year-old kid leading the way when there must be tens, you would imagine, of Premier League footballers who are gay, who don't feel comfortable enough to come out, tens of other people in the Championship, and so on and so on. Is this a big step, or is it just one kid? What do you think?
Oh, I think it's humongous. And he's 17. Well, what bravery. I didn't come out until I was 23, and I found that really hard, supported by, so many friends and family without the glare of the public eye. To do it at 17, at the stage of his career, is just phenomenal. And it's like my dad was a football referee for much of my childhood and didn't have childcare, so I went with him to matches. We're talking about Highland League. This is not Premier League football. This is very cold Scottish stadiums in the middle of winter, and I would just sit on the ball, at the halfway line whilst my dad ran the line or was a referee. And it's where at age 5 I learned all my swear words, but it's also where I experienced homophobia for the first time, or at least the use of homophobic language. And I carried that throughout my whole of my life. I associated kind of football with intolerance for such a long time. And the big thing for me actually was Harry Kane and wearing the rainbow flag at the World Cup. That made me cry. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe we'd come that far. And I think that type of important symbolism has created a cultural environment for somebody like Jake at the age of 17 to push things on a bit further. And his story, I think, could transform football and sport more generally.
It's a great point, beautifully put. William, do you think we're maybe then weeks or months away from a Premier League football? Because Jake's important, and for the reasons that Kezia sets out, but Jake plays in the Championship. He's at the beginning of his career. He's not a regular. We wish him all the best in the world. There's got to be a moment, has there not, when the Premier League says, or someone from the Premier League says, I'm a footballer, I'm gay, and then at some point it ceases to be news. That's the aim that I think everyone's getting to.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I don't know, but I imagine that what's just happened does bring forward that moment. Sport has lagged behind the worlds of politics or business or most aspects of professional life. Sport has been lagging behind, particularly in football, in people being able to be open about their sexuality. So yes, at some point you get the avalanche, really, of people saying, well, now it's okay. And yes, I think this brave move by this individual does bring that forward.
Yeah, we'll have to see what happens. Great to speak to you both. Fascinating thoughts as ever. That's William Hague, former Tory leader and Times columnist, and Kezia Dugdale, a former Scottish Labour leader, also a Times columnist. And just to prove I can still do it as well as Asma, director of the John Smith Centre at Glasgow University as well, I can do the long titles. I might not be able to say apocalyptic,